There have been a lot of changes in the last few months. Many of you might be feeling a little overwhelmed by all of this. So, there's the rapid adoption of AI, and I know many organizations are beginning to discuss and try and figure out how they're going to do this, and what's the safe way, and what's the right way to do this, and how does it work best in the organization. On top of this, there's been a dramatic increase in cyber attacks, and especially from hostile nations. And there have also been, in certain industries, tremendous turnover in staff, which always raises issues when it comes to cybersecurity and continuity of operations. So today I wanted to talk about how you can use decision models in these very uncertain times. I'm Charlene Deaver Vasquez. Thank you for taking time to visit this podcast. I hope you find this information useful. If you do, depending on where you're listening to this, please feel free to subscribe, like, and follow. And then that way you'll get notified when I put another podcast out. So let's take a minute, talk about this decision-based models, and why would this be the go-to that I would suggest when there is such uncertainty. Most people tend to think that decision models are primarily based on data that you have. And in many cases, this is true. When we're talking about cyber risk, the primary data that I tend to want people to focus on is your current vulnerability. So vulnerability analysis is foundational, in my opinion, for any sort of risk management and risk models. You want to understand that first. Having that piece out of the way, now let's talk about, with all of this uncertainty, how do you take the data that you have and what do you do about the stuff that you just don't know, the stuff that is evolving like AI and increased threats and new cyber attacks that are being developed, and the fact that cyber criminals are using AI to come up with new and novel kinds of attacks. So let's just accept that there is a tremendous amount of uncertainty and we're having trouble getting our arms around this. So let me lay out for you some steps you can take and using decision-based models, why this is so important. So when we have a great deal of uncertainty, often this means we don't have a lot of data, right? So something is evolving. We don't have good frameworks yet. Those are just being developed for using AI. There are more different, diverse, and virulent attacks coming at us. We're seeing an increase in attacks against smaller and mid-sized businesses that are actually targeting much larger organizations. So when there is uncertainty, this is when we really should be relying more on models for helping us make the decisions, because models use mathematic algorithms to input what I will call factors. What are the factors that you would consider when you're trying to make this decision? What are the things you are looking at and considering? And those are the key points and data points that go into the model. Then the models use the math of probability, which sounds very complicated. It's not really. These algorithms are known, and in fact, they're very reliable. This kind of math is used in almost every scenario where there is a high degree of uncertainty. Epidemiology, seismology, in finance, in so many ways, that's the math that helps us grapple with these large unknowns. So let's continue walking through this. Let's say that you wanted to model how to make a decision for anything. Let's say it's a vendor that you want to choose, or how should you prioritize where you're putting your resources and what should you focus on, given the changing landscape. So the way that you put together one of these very basic models is you look at what are the things I'm going to consider as I make this decision. And because we don't have a lot of hard data, a lot of this information is going to be things that are in the news. So you might have reports. It might not be specific to your vulnerabilities, but they're going to be things that are available in the industry. And we're going to call these indicators. So these indicators will help you to shape the direction that that decision will go over a period of time. Does this make sense? So you're going to start looking for those factors or indicators that you're going to pay attention to that will help you inform yourself about this decision that you have to make. So you might look at ongoing news articles, which can feel a little overwhelming, but pick 2 or 3 or 4 of the top sources you trust that are speaking about this very specific issue that you are tracking to make this decision. So you'll look at reputable reports in the industry. And what you're looking for are some of the most current things that are happening, as well as some of the reports that trend over time. Okay, so you want to have a variety of voices that you are listening to that are talking about this subject. And you're going to turn that information along with other information. You're going to turn that from qualitative, how do they think? What do they feel, right? Into quantitative values that will then go into this very basic model that just runs an algorithm. And there's a number of different algorithms that you can use in these models. The point is, you'll collect these indicators that you're looking at, right? And it could also be things as simple as talking to your peers in the industry. How do they feel? Ask the right questions. How do they feel this might impact in the next 30 days? How do they feel this might impact their decisions in the next 60 days, in the next 6 months, in the next year? How are your peers consuming this information, and take that qualitative value, and then you're going to turn that into quantitative data. Now, that may sound challenging, but that process is the same process that has been used, oh my God, forever in areas like medical or any research projects. And what they do is they use questionnaires, and they use these questionnaires to gather qualitative data about these key indicators or the factors that they are considering to build their model for decision making. And then that information is turned into numerical values. Think of it as putting the questions. So let's say the questions are geared to how concerned are you about this impacting your business in the next 6 months? Then you can rate this on a 1 through 5 scale. Anything that you can get onto a 1 through 5 scale, you can quantify, and now you can use that in these mathematical models. So I hope this helps give you a little bit of an overview of how decision-based models are really sometimes more important when you have great uncertainty. So let's go back to this for a few more minutes and consider the kinds of decisions you might be struggling with right now, the kinds of decisions that I think many businesses are struggling with right now. And that would be the risk of AI, adopting it within my organization. Now, there's not frameworks in place right now that give you very good guidance, but there are some very basic good use cases that can be early adoptions, and they limit the AI to focus on very specific data sets to generate very specific outcomes. And those become much less risky and give you time to then understand. So this is a really good case study because one of the key factors that is really important when you're dealing with uncertainty is adopting the scientific method process. And we see this same method used anywhere that we are trying to learn something or we are trying to improve something. And the math underneath that is the same math that runs AI, as a matter of fact. It's the same math that describes how we make decisions as human beings, and that would be the Bayesian inference. But the process goes like this. We have a question or a challenge we're trying to solve, right? How should I adopt AI? And so we gather information. We do that research. We see what's happening in the industry. We look at a couple of products. We see what's readily available to us, and we consider what might be an easy first use case in our organization. And then we test. We try it a little bit, and then we learn from that. How did we learn from that? We apply that to what we're doing and what we're thinking and how we're making the decision, and we iterate, and then we do it again. So we take small steps, and then we take data that we've learned, We experiment. We might try a few things. We might do a few beta tests in something, or we might read where somebody else has done a use case. We learn from that. How do we improve is the question. How do we improve? Then we put that back into our model. So when we use a decision-based model and a model for decision support where there's great uncertainty, this is not a do once and it's done. And it's also not about what's the magic number that comes out at the end of the process. Instead, it is about an iterative process, because when you begin, when there's great uncertainty, that range is very large, right? We're not precise yet. We're a very broad range of what we think might be the impact or what we think might be the right choice. That's very broad. And it is the iterations where we are learning and refining that allow us to draw that range into something that is much more reasonable. And then over time, it becomes very precise. And now we have very high confidence that that's exactly the right thing to do. But the magic is, even with a very broad range, you have eliminated some things. Some things to the left and to the right are outside of that initial very broad range of uncertainty. Those things you're clearly not considering. And over time, as you iterate, you are eliminating other things that you are not going to consider. And you will find that you don't have to be very, very precise in your decision. You can still have a considerable range of uncertainty, but it is enough to make a major decision. And then you can make that decision and then you go on to the next step. And it's all an iterative process. So I hope this has helped in giving you some basic foundational understanding of decision models that would be useful in times like now, where there is a great deal of uncertainty, but yet you still have to make a decision. And another reason that using models is so important, whenever you need to, as a CISO, as a risk manager, whenever you need to communicate your decision process to stakeholders, having a process. Number one, having a process. Number two, being able to articulate what were the factors that you considered, right? What were the sources? What were the sources that you looked at? What was the data that you evaluated? What were the questions and answers that you used to do your analysis? And the fact that you have done analysis, all of that puts you in a much better position for stakeholder buy-in, because now the conversation is not around your decision, right or wrong, but it is about the process. And so now you will find you will get collaboration on the details of the process, and that will lay the foundation for you to be able to move to consensus and have stakeholder buy-in, that they feel confident enough and you feel confident enough that given the data available and given the time frame you have to make the decision, that you have done a sufficient due diligence in order to make that decision. Would that change over time? Absolutely. And that's the way that you approach these kinds of decisions. It's not a done once and it's over, set in stone. It is all an iterative process based on the data you have today, based on these factors that you evaluated, given the algorithm that you used. This is the level of uncertainty you have, but you have enough to make a decision. And that's how that process works when it works successfully. Now I'm going to leave you with one last thought. I spoke about this being an iterative process, and that's true. But I also want to highlight this process requires interaction. It requires the human being to explore, to question, and to consider, and to evaluate and weigh things one against the other. Research tells us consistently that no matter what the risk management process we are involved in, the value, the hands down best value that comes from whatever that process is the human involvement. It is always the human consideration. In other words, what we learn from the process is the most important thing.